こんにちは、ジェミニ先生です。JLPT N5 の試験対策、一緒に頑張りましょう。わからないことがあれば、いつでも聞いてください。一緒に日本語をマスターしましょう。
Oh my goodness, it actually works. I can't believe that I've actually successfully coded an AI agent as my Japanese teacher. I was preparing to study for my JLPT N5 exam at the start of July and was looking around for online materials to help me prepare. So I thought to myself, with the advent of LLMs and AI agents, can I code a Japanese teacher using AI to help me prepare for the N5 exam? I looked around online and found out that Google Gemini actually supports the Japanese language. Now this is starting to look promising. But before we start coding, let's take a look at how the JLPT N5 test is like and what are some areas which I would like Gemini to help me with first. Else, we wouldn't know what to expect even if I can code it out. From the official JLPT website, N5 is divided into three sections. First is vocabulary language knowledge, next is grammar language knowledge, and the last is listening. It is to be first completed in 1.5 hours, and interestingly, they have reduced the number of questions compared to the past. In order for the agent to help me with N5 preparation, I needed to do a couple of things. Firstly, I will need it to introduce itself. This, I suppose, would be kind of the most basic thing it should be able to do. Secondly, it needs to be able to understand the vocabulary and grammar level necessary for N5. Thirdly, it has to be able to explain concepts to me if I ask it questions I do not understand. Fourth, it has to be able to do translation of sentences. Fifth, it has to be able to generate multiple choice questions to test my knowledge, and it would be best if it is able to come up with suitable questions in the N5 test format as well. Sixth, it has to generate a read aloud paragraph to test the listening comprehension component of the test. And lastly, it has to be able to hold its own in the back and forth written conversation. These are simple things that I look at that would qualify as the bare minimum necessary to be a Japanese language teacher. Now, just a caveat before we start to take a look at it. I'm not designing some app with a sexy looking UI. I'm just going to code in Google Colab and have its replies output in the console. So just letting you know in case you are expecting something fancy. The first thing is, how do we access the Gemini API? Well, there's quite a good amount of documentation on it, and doing a simple Google search and following through the steps would grant you access to it. Apart from it, you would need to have a Google AI Studio account to create your own private API key, which you will need to access the API. Once you have copied the codes, remember to store the API keys in secrets so that you can access it. The model that I have used for this is Gemini 1.5 Flash. There are other models available, but I think this would be the most suited for the task. Also, I have followed most of the default settings and configuration for the model, except two things. First, which is to remove the limit for the number of tokens, the maximum number of output tokens, and to give it a system instruction. The reason for removing the maximum number of output tokens is because Japanese characters utilize more token usage compared to English alphabets, and removing it would prevent sudden error messages from popping out. I will explain this further later in my closing thoughts. Next, the system instruction is to give it a contextual word prompt so that it helps to narrow its expected scope and contextualizes the subsequent word prompt which I will be feeding it later. I have tried a few variants and felt that this is the most ideal for now. You can try out different words and phrases and see what type of responses you can get from it. With the system instruction given, the setup is now complete, so let's test it out. To start chatting with it, just type what you want to ask it in the chat session, .sendMessage function, and print response.text to see its reply. Let us start with a word prompt, asking Gemini to introduce itself and to include a second line for hiragana pronunciation and a third line for English translation. I have pre-ran the codes and here are the results. It seems to be working fine. Here, we can see that it has also taken on the persona of Gemini Sensei who will teach Japanese. This is because of the system instruction we fed it earlier when we initialized the model. Next, let's ask it to generate an N5 suitable vocabulary list so that I can study it. We can feed it a word prompt to come up with 100 words and put them in the first column, hiragana in the second column, and the corresponding English meaning in the third column. Looking at this initially, it seems to have generated a good vocabulary list. But looking at the verb vocabularies it generated, there are inconsistencies as they are in different forms. Also, the scope might be too broad, and you might prefer a narrower scope such as places, fruits, or verbs. As such, we can modify the word prompt to filter and narrow the scope, such as what I have done over here, down here. We can see that it generates a good list of vocabulary of places. And we can also do the same for vocabulary on adjectives too. Unfortunately, here you can see it breaking down a bit as it generates an unexpected list. What I've learned is that there are two types of adjectives, E and Na adjectives. The list seems to have been generated correctly for E adjectives, but for Na adjectives, it seems to have been generated incorrectly as the adjectives in their base form do not end with na. Also, the E form column does not help with explaining the na adjectives, and there is no explanation for it in the answer here as well. Apart from adjectives, we can do the same for verbs as well, or any other specific vocabulary you have in mind and see the results. Barring the slight mistake, the vocabulary generated seems to be in line with what I've studied so far, so hopefully it's sufficient for me to pass. Since Gemini Sensei is able to understand vocabulary, how about grammar and the different grammatical rules? Let's find out. I'll put in a modified word prompt including an explanation of the grammar rule and a sentence example as well. From the list displayed here, it seems to have done well. Third on the list is to ask it to explain some concepts. Some of the various forms of Japanese words are confusing to me. Let's ask it to explain the different forms such as the te form, dictionary form, nai form, and ta form to me. It seems like quite a simple, high-level overview of the various forms. But how about if we want to find out how to convert different forms of groups of verbs or E and Na adjectives to the various forms? Let's rephrase and ask it again. The answer seems to be quite simple. And to a confused person, this might not be a very good explanation to it. Let's try another concept which I'm confused about. And that is that which form do I use before the phrase to omoimasu? Unfortunately, looking at its provided response, I am still not clear about the word form to use. Moving along, the fourth on the list is text translation, which I don't think should be a problem for it, as its level should be better than Google Translate. I have extracted a piece of text taken from the sample JLPT test question and asked it to translate the passage. From its answer, it seems to have done a good job at it. Fifth is to generate multiple choice questions. Let's start with vocabulary MCQ. I'll give it the prompt to generate 5 questions and to provide the answers at the end. Now, looking at the questions that it has generated, it might seem okay, but upon closer inspection of some of the questions it came up with, there appears to be some ambiguity. For example, in question 2 here, 今日はだが降っています right? There could be multiple answers which could be filled in. For example, ame and yuki. The same for question number 3. 私はだで友達と会いました And these are different locations, right? Like 레스토랑, 도서관, 코엔, 학교. All of these places could be places where you could have met up with your friends. Let's try again to generate one more time and see if the questions are any better. This might take a while to run. And looking at it, Nope, it doesn't seem to have been any better. Right, in fact, it might have been worse because English answers are generated here as well. Now that we have tried the vocabulary MCQ, let's do the same for grammar as well, and hopefully the results will come out with something better. Similarly, I will give it the prompt to generate 5 questions and to provide the answers at the end. And looking at the questions, right, this time round, the quality seems to have deteriorated. If we look at it closely, the questions are mostly repetitive and even the answers are ordered in a similar fashion. Let's generate one more time and see if the quality of the questions improve. Looking at it, it seems to have a similar issue whereby there's English words that's generated as well. However, at the very least, the questions are not that repetitive, even though we could see that they are generally still testing for questions about the timing of when. The quality of MCQ questions is less than desirable. But now, what if we give it an example? Would it be able to generate something better? So I gave it a word prompt with a sample question provided from the JLPT N5 exam to see what it would generate. The question is to provide a sentence and to choose the answer with the same meaning as the provided sentences from the choices below. Now the results, we can see that the questions and answers seem to be better in testing various grammar forms, but unfortunately, it still doesn't provide a similar question format to this sample provided. Next, what would a sensei be without a voice? As such, I need to incorporate a text-to-speech feature for it so that it has a voice and is able to speak. The reason for this is because there is a listening component in the N5 exam, and to emulate it, we will need a voice to read out the passage as well. Remember the voice you heard at the start of the video? That voice is taken from VoiceVox. Unfortunately, I will not be using that voice for the read aloud text, and instead I've opted for the GTTS library or Google Text-to-Speech library for a plain Japanese voice instead. The reason for this is because based on my experience, the listening CDs for Japanese reading during the exam is quite monotone, and the voice from this library would resemble the exam conditions more closely. You can listen to a sample of it. I've recorded a simple introduction there by the model.
Konnichiwa, Gemini 先生です。JLPT N5 の試験対策、一緒に頑張りましょう。わからないことがあれば、いつでも聞いてください。一緒に日本語をマスターしましょう。
Okay, it's not perfect and sounds a bit robotic, but this will do. You can also hear that it differs significantly from what we heard at the beginning of the video. Now that we have a voice output, we need a short text passage along with questions about it to complete the listening component. I've decided to ask it to generate a short passage based on an extract from a child's diary and to have it come up with a few MCQ on the text generated. The result it came up with is a text regarding a child's birthday today. The questions are asking things which happened from the text, so it fulfilled the criteria. Unfortunately, the text generated doesn't seem suited for JLPT N5. There are a few vocabulary words which I do not recognize, such as ningyo. This would be a problem as I have specified it to use only words available from JLPT N5, but it used words from higher levels instead. Apart from that, the text generated included asterisks, which even though I specified in the word prompt not to include it. This would actually be included during the read aloud section and would affect the experience of it. You can try to generate a different text using the code and you will hear it read aloud the asterisks as well. The final thing to do after the listening text would be to generate an answer list so that you may compare your answers to it as well. The last thing I would like it to do is to be able to have a written conversation with it. Now, of course, it would be more interesting and perhaps human-like to have a spoken conversation with it, but it will be more complicated as it involves an additional layer of speech-to-text, and it's also not helpful for the N5 examination as there is no spoken conversation. As such, I've decided to just use the written conversation as I think that it will be more helpful instead. I gave it a word prompt to have a back and forth conversation with the user and to help to correct any mistakes made by the user if necessary. Since it is going to be a back and forth conversation, there has to be a way for the conversation to end as well. I mean, we could kill the session by interrupting it, but it wouldn't be that refined, wouldn't it? So I've included a section such that if I mention Jaramata, the session will end. With this code, let's test it out. First, I'm going to input a few words as a common greeting. Konnichiwa, kyou wa ii tenki desu ne. Telling it hello, and it's good weather, isn't it? And then saying that yes, the weather is good. And then shall you study and practice JLPT N5? Then I'll fit in another reply to say that yes, thank you. Let's study hard. So this would replicate a back and forth conversation. So what it's asking is that it's asking about book, right? 何か読めますか? So maybe we can put it on. Yep. And so if we look at it, it's talking about Shinbun, newspaper. 読んだことがありますか? Just asking if you know how to speak it. And what if we just give it a reply and say that we are not able to speak it? News. So it's talking about it's using news. Dekiru ni narimashou. And then showing another word, chikan. Okay, but what if we want to switch up and we want to ask it something else instead? So instead of letting it detect the flow, you can also choose to interrupt it and say like something else. Like, 私は車が買いたいです. And then they're still insisting on あなたはと答えました. It's still insisting on this conversation flow. This is pretty interesting because I've not experienced this. So it seems that previously when I was able to use these words, was able to change or correct the flow of the conversation, but in this case it seems to be pretty adamant in going on with its own flow. This is a pretty interesting turn of events. So, 時間はありますか? So, okay, what if we want to test if we can correct mistakes that we make? So, I'll type hi arimasen, which is actually a conflicting between the first part of the reply and the second part. And see if it's able to correct the mistake. Wow, interesting. actually didn't pick up the mistake. So the correct word should be hai arimasu instead of hai arimasen, because if you have to use arimasen, it should be iie arimasen. And so it is unable to pick up this mistake, which is interesting because this hasn't happened in the previous time when I ran this code. One thing that I forgot to mention earlier is to test out the function of jamata, which is to end the session. So over here I have another set of text which I have a back and forth conversation with it, and if I input the words jamata, we will see that the session ends as well. You can see that it gave a response and then the session ended, and so that concludes this section for a written conversation. So far, we have tried to assess Gemini's feasibility as a Japanese language sensei, and unfortunately, it's not very good performance-wise. Here are some observations that I made while coding and interacting with it. The most glaring thing would be the mistakes it made in generating answers to questions I asked, and the lack of quality of questions which it generated. Also, despite the initial word prompt provided to stick to N5 vocabulary, it still includes higher level words in its replies and questions that it generated. The next observation is that the Japanese language exacts a heavier toll on Gemini's performance compared to the English language. Remember that there is a commented outline for maximum output tokens under the generation configuration at the beginning of the notebook during the initialization of the model? Well, the limit of maximum output tokens is removed, else there will be a 500 post error while generating responses for some of the prompts. The reason is because Japanese characters take up more tokens to represent the same word as compared to English. This results in it utilizing more tokens, and limiting the number of output tokens would result in an error. As such, this would probably mean it takes up more memory and will be slower in its responses as well. The third point is the lack of awareness of Japanese culture. Japanese culture is different from the Western culture, where it places a strong emphasis on hierarchy and relationship, and you can't speak casually towards your superiors or parents or people coming from a place of high authority like how you would speak with your friends. This shows some of the responses provided, where it is a very friendly and casual manner instead of a formal way of writing. So even though it is able to come up with a structurally correct sentence, it doesn't tell you which is the appropriate setting to use the casual manner of speaking compared to a human Japanese sensei who will be able to do so. It also won't be able to tell and explain to you the nuances of Japanese tradition, festivals, and practices like a human would, should you want to understand and learn more. So what are some of the ways we can improve it then? The first thing I can think of is to experiment with multiple variations of word prompts and find one that you feel fits best to the problem statement. Through this, I see that the LLM actually comes up with different responses when different prompts or instructions are fed to it. As such, if there is time, it might be a good idea to use different word prompts and instructions and test the responses to see which one provides the best one. Apart from trying out various word prompts, to improve the quality of specific questions which we ask it, we can try single or multi-shot word prompts by providing several examples of what we expect out of it, so that it can give us something as close as possible to our expectations. I have tried a single short word prompt in generating MCQ questions for the exam, using a sample question, and though there is a slight improvement in the quality of question it came up with, it was not in the format that I expected it to be. Perhaps it might perform better with multi-shot word prompts instead. Yet another way that I have thought to improve it is to build a retrieval augmented generation system, or in short, RAG model. What this entails is to source for a custom and tailored data source specifically for the JLPT N5 exam, and to allow the LLM to search this database for relevant information to come up with the most appropriate response to my prompts. I believe that with the specialized data source, it should be able to work better with a limited dataset and have a better fine-tuned response for the prompts. The last thing that I can think of is that will take it to the next level is for it to be able to engage in verbal conversation. This would mean adding the feature of speech to text and text to speech so that it is able to understand the user's speech converted, generate a response, and output an audio response. This would take it a step closer towards human likeness, but I left this feature out as I felt that it was not necessary to help me prepare for my JLPT N5 exam. Overall, it is not all bad though, as I think that it still makes a good companion to have a casual and fun chat with in Japanese. It seems like AI is still far off from replacing humans, and in this case, a language teacher. However, things will just improve exponentially from now on, and I'm sure there will be a better version in future that will do a better job than what it is doing now, and I look forward to it. For now, we make do with what we have, and I have linked the code in the description box for those who are interested in trying it out. That's the end of the video. Hope you enjoy it, and if you have any thoughts, feel free to share them in the comment box down below. If you like this video and would like to see more content of this nature, please be sure to like and subscribe as well. Thanks for watching, and until next time.